would go ahead and get the program started a few minutes early, so you have plenty of time for questions. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kathy Sheeran. I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters of Orange County. Thank you all for coming today. This is a very important community forum. We're grateful to all of you for being part of this engaged and informed community. We are especially glad to welcome everyone here in person and all of you that are joining us today online. Today's forum is being live streamed on Facebook, and a recorded version will be available on the League's YouTube page later this week. And if you haven't done so already, please mute your cell phones. And now, if you wish to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. At this time, we'd like to acknowledge all elected officials who are here this morning and candidates who have officially filed to run for office. Please go to the side mic on my left and introduce yourself, limiting your introduction to your name and office. And audience, please hold your applause till all the candidates have announced themselves.
Try that again. Sheila DeCiccio, Mayor of Winter Park. Welcome to our beautiful city.
Robin Dellinger, I'm the chair of the Seminole County School Board.
Please hold your applause.
Stephanie Vanos, Orange County School Board member for District 6.
Good morning, Chair Adams, Orange County Judge, running for retention.
Good morning, John Lowndes. I'm the mayor of Maitland, and I'm running for Senate District 10.
Good morning, Tamika Hampton-Johnson, Circuit Court Judge, Group 1 candidate.
Good morning, Asma Azam. I'm running for Orange County Judge, Group 5.
Thank you. Judy Garabo-Hayes, Judge-elect, Orange County Group 21.
Christina Arguella, Circuit Court Judge, Group 2.
Good morning, Dr. Kelly Martinez-Semrad, Orange County Vice Mayor and District 5 Commissioner.
Good morning, Orange County. Aaron Emanuel Lewis, your Orange County District 7 Commission candidate.
Good morning, Christy Lou Mitchell for 9th Circuit Judge, Group 2.
And I will round it out from Winter Park. I am Elizabeth Ingram, City Commissioner for Winter Park.
Thank you, everyone. It takes many hands to do the work of the League, and that is especially true in an election year. On Saturday, the Orange County League and community partners joined in with leagues across the country in a national day of action to get out the vote. although we didn't have any pictures of them up there, we had a large group of volunteers that also did several thousand postcards as well. So a big thanks to everyone who participated. Before we move on, I'd like to recognize and thank the generous sponsors who make the League's works possible. Our bronze sponsor, the Honorable Cynthia McKinnon. Our silver sponsors, the Kindred Three, Joan Irwin, Sue Foreman, and Lee Rambo Kemp. Friends of the League, the Honorable Fred Lawton and Shelley Lawton, Honorable Bob LeBlanc and Joni LeBlanc, Dr. Gloria Picard. Silver sponsors, Lynn and David Berelsman. The Voting Voices, Michelle Levy, Lori and Richard Wack, Caroline Emmons Schramm. And we'd like to welcome our newest silver sponsors, Emerson R. Thompson Jr., Jenny Green Chan, and Ella Chan. And a huge thanks to our visionary sponsors, Jennifer and Phil Anderson. Will our sponsors please stand up and be recognized? And if you'd like to add your name to this prestigious list, please talk to Lee Rambo Kemp, who isn't here today, but she would be delighted to talk with you. We've all heard Benjamin Franklin's famous line, "In this world, nothing can be certain except death and taxes." But today we're going to challenge at least one of those certainties. Recent polling shows 74% support for the property tax amendment. So you would think that sounds like a slam dunk. But here's where it gets interesting. Research suggests that support can drop sharply when voters learn more about what the amendment actually does. So what happens when we move beyond the headline number? Today we're going to take a closer look at the amendment, the research behind these shifting opinions, and why voters' views may change when they have more information. And leading that conversation is a journalist who knows Central Florida inside and out. Our moderator is Steve Mort, host of Talking Central Florida, a podcast from the News Collaborative of Central Florida. The show airs on Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. on Central Florida Public Media, and is also available on major podcast platforms and YouTube. Before Talking Central Florida, Steve was the executive producer and host of Newsnight on WUCF. So with that, let's get beyond the soundbite, dig into the numbers, and take a look at the property tax amendment. Please join me in welcoming Steve Mort.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for the introduction, and thanks to everyone for coming out for this discussion on what's sort of become one of the biggest political issues, I think, in Florida this year. And I think it's fair to say that with rising home values in recent years, it's prompted what has become, shall we say, a lively discussion over how governments spend those property tax revenues, whether they're spending too much and whether taxpayers are getting enough in return. Supporters of property tax relief, of course, in Tallahassee say local governments have room to become more efficient. They argue that local spending in some places has become excessive. Opponents of Amendment 3 say spending increases usually represent a growing need for services amid what's been a period of population growth for Florida. They also say Amendment 3 jeopardizes local services that people rely on. So today we want to look at what Amendment 3 might mean for local government finances here in Orange County, but also elsewhere in the state, both in the near and the long term, and if counties and municipalities have less money coming in, will they be able to trim spending to make the numbers add up? And also, will they cut services in a way that the public might notice? The other thing that we want to talk about is whether or not they might try to raise money in a different way, possibly by increasing fees and things like that. And also, could the consequences be different for smaller municipalities that maybe have fewer high-value properties and a more limited tax base? We should also mention that the Florida Attorney General, James Uthmeier, is currently overseeing a rewrite of the title and the ballot summary language for Amendment 3. That was, of course, after a circuit judge ruled the original wording was misleading and contained political rhetoric. So it is a lot to get through. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce the panelists, if they'd like to come up as I introduce them. First of all, Jason Garcia. He's leading investigative journalist here in Central Florida, the publisher of Seeking Rents, an independent newsletter and podcast about state politics. Jason's reporting explores the ways in which big businesses and other special interests are influencing public policy. Please welcome Jason Garcia. Next, Sadaf Knight serves as Chief Executive Officer of the Florida Policy Institute, leading the organization's efforts to achieve broadly shared prosperity for all Floridians. She has more than 15 years of experience in public policy research, advocacy, and nonprofit management. Her areas of expertise include revenue, economic development, and community development policy. Please welcome Sadaf Knight. And Amy Mercado is the Orange County property appraiser. She was elected in November 2020. Prior to that, Amy was state representative for Florida House District 48 from 2016 to 2020, serving on a wide array of committees, including the ranking member on the important Ways and Means Committee. Please welcome Amy Mercado. All right, well, let's get into it. Just keep an eye on the timekeeper. We want to try to keep things on time if we can. I want to start off with a big picture here about what Amendment 3 actually does. I sort of tried to summarize it there at the top, but Jason, let me start with you on this one. What does Amendment 3 do? And the headline of it, who does it benefit? Who might it harm?
Yeah, so there's actually quite a complicated question to answer, because even the Florida legislature doesn't entirely understand what Amendment 3 does. But there are kind of two big pieces to it. The first is, obviously, it supersizes the homestead exemption. So generally speaking, there's a $50,000 homestead exemption right there. This would take it to $250,000 within 2 years. So obviously, that's a big bite off of homestead property taxes right there. But there's a second piece that will impose a stricter assessment cap on all other property, so business property, vacation homes, second homes, that sort of thing. So right now, under Florida law, there is a 10% assessment cap, which that means essentially the taxable value of your property, if it's again, business property or non-homestead property, can't go up more than 10% a year. This would take that down to 5%, which is getting you pretty close to your Save Our Homes cap, right? And so 5% is a very strict cap. And what you see is these two pieces sort of work together in the sense of, if you're just looking at it from the financial impact, there's a big hit right off the bat from the homestead exemption going to $250,000 statewide, and obviously there's like lots of variations across communities and stuff, but statewide it's about $8 billion. But then the impact grows within 4 years to $12 billion statewide, and that's because that 5% assessment cap is now ratcheting up and ratcheting up and ratcheting up. So it's kind of like, you know, you take a big bite right off the bat and then you continue sort of starving the beast from there, if that makes sense. But there's actually a lot more to it. And the part I mentioned that the legislature has no idea, there's a mechanism in there that is designed to allow the homestead exemption to be increased going forward even further, all the way up to potentially 100%, meaning eliminating homestead property taxes. We're talking solely about city, county, special district taxes here. But it is unclear from the legislation, or from the language of the amendment, who would actually have that authority. And we've gotten conflicting answers out of the Florida legislature. So the House sponsor of the bill says the legislature will be able to increase the homestead exemption going forward. The Senate has said, no, cities and counties will have that authority going forward. So you're getting conflicting answers, and that's sort of what happens when you put a giant ballot measure on the ballot in a 27-hour special session.
Sadaf, do you agree with Jason's assessment there?
I agree. I think you summed it up pretty well. I would say the one thing you didn't mention is that it also calls for a 5-year requirement that a person has to have Florida residency in order to qualify for the exemptions. But again, that raises questions because the language around that is also unclear, because in other, when in statutes that discuss, homestead exemptions, residency is property ownership. But what if you were a renter and you have lived in Florida for many, many years, you own a vehicle, you've lived here, but you haven't owned property, so how does that work? So essentially it's creating a 2-tier system that, again, no clarity on how that would actually work.
Amy, how about you? What do you make of it, and how it might affect the way you do your job, for example?
So our role in the office is to administer whatever comes out of the legislation. So y'all need to send lots of energy, prayers, all of the things if this does pass, because no one knows. This is the true statement. On your tables, my team actually shared a one-pager. This is specific to Orange County. You don't need to look at it just yet. We'll talk through it as we continue to speak. But this is a snapshot of what it actually looks like and feels like here. Because to the extent of billions, that's such a unknown number, right? How does it affect you and your local municipality, I think is the most appropriate piece. And so Orange County did a really great job in putting some of it together in dollars. At the end of the day, there's still so many unknowns, and the legislature does need to get back together and do an implementing bill if and when this passes. So all of the questions that we still have and will continue to have, they try to take a bite at it then. An unknown outcome later. And so it's important for you all to understand what the ramifications are from a local component. In the bottom of that one pager, you'll see countywide tax reduction. What does that mean to you? In 2027, for the first round, that's an $89 million hit to the county. If you take that number and you look at it from a fire, for example, fire department and sheriff, that's $46 million off of the fire department and $30 million off of the sheriff department. So what I ask folks to take into consideration when they're making decisions of say yay or nay, this is your personal decision, is what are your thoughts today on potential response times when you call 911 and your sheriff shows up or a fire department or an ambulance shows up, because that's a direct effect. That's what your taxes are paying for, amongst other things. So please take into consideration what those actual ramifications are. This page will show you 2 different sources. One is the county and one is the State Property Appraiser Association of Florida. There are lots of Q&A in there that you can walk through and get more details, and I'm always happy to share more information on a very complicated process.
Well, Amy referred there to the public safety services, sheriffs, for example, police. And I wonder, we just saw the Florida Sheriff's Association, I put this to you, Jason, say they were opposed. They've joined sort of other groups in law enforcement and fire to oppose Amendment 3. Recently we put up a little clip of our show on social media. A lot of people are under the impression that those services are exempt, that they are protected under Amendment 3. Is that the case, Jason?
No, it's absolutely not the case, and that's why a court has ruled that the ballot language is misleading. There's actually a number of statements in the ballot summary that were misleading, but one of them was it says it protects core services, and there's literally nothing in the bill or in the ballot proposal that restricts government spending in any way or preserves funding for any specific use. So no, it does not protect funding for this. And a lot of this speaks to the challenge that supporters of this have always faced, and this was alluded to off the top, is that property tax cuts in a vacuum are very popular. But, loss of government funding or loss of local government services is very unpopular. And so this has all been one big exercise in trying to avoid having the conversation about what comes next. And this goes all the way back to, folks might remember that the governor and the legislature started talking about this 2 years ago, right? The legislature a year ago put $1 million into the state budget to study this, to have the state's nonpartisan economists look through what would be the impact of like removing homestead property tax exemption, homestead property taxes, understanding like sort of what would be kind of like the corollary revenue increases, the service cuts, that sort of thing. The governor vetoed that money. He did not want that study done. And then they waited to hold this special session until after everything else had been done. Nobody, the regular sort of professional staff of the legislature was sort of disbanded for a time, and they passed this before even having economists study. They didn't actually get the revenue impact until after they'd already voted to put it on the ballot. And again, it is all about just trying to avoid having the conversation of how you pay for it.
Yeah. Yes, what, Sanav?
I think it's a really good point to remember that they've been talking about this for a long time. We, were paying attention and recognizing that this was a conversation that was gaining some steam, right? So at FPI, we were looking at this issue. And then last January, the governor came out with his proposal which was like, I think, a pretty much complete elimination of property taxes. We already had our report in the works, so 3 days later we were able to publish a report. Some people think that we wrote it in 3 days, which I'll let them think that. But it began long before this resolution was passed, and it will continue because even if it passes or doesn't pass in November, there's a tax commission next year, and the issue of taxes and reducing taxes and coming back to the property tax question if it doesn't pass, it's going to keep going. So this is a long-term issue for us.
How do, from those that you talk to, Amy, how do cities and counties, municipalities feel? Is there a sense of nervousness that this might pass?
Oh, absolutely, because you're talking about how they are going to handle the services that they're required to do with unknown numbers, right? I don't know anyone in this room that can go through the unknown without some kind of budget, even if it's a temporary budget. That's what you're talking about. And I would like to share, we have to understand that the complete setup of our tax structure in the state of Florida is inequitable to begin with. It's intentionally that way. It's always been that way. The whole point and impact and intent for the homestead exemption was to keep people in their homes. And so even the setup of that is harsh for people that haven't been here for long. It really does impact the newer homeowner, the person that's coming now to purchase today, the younger generation trying to purchase in today's dollars, because we assess the property. We're going to assess the physical property, the land and building today. That's what your assessment is based on. But your exemptions are based on the humans that live in there. So if you've been there for 40 years, you're not paying your fair share, quote unquote, of the taxes for that property because you have all these savings for those 40 years. Your neighbors are, your new neighbors are, right? Because they're paying in today's prices. So you can have a $10,000 tax bill as the new neighbor, and the person that has been there for decades is potentially paying $2,000. But the services cost what the services cost. So it's not an equal system, no matter how you look at it.
And Steve, if I could just add just to the point of sort of what the impact would be and sort of what this would look at. Obviously, like, we're talking about enormous numbers that are kind of like meaningless to most people, right? $12 billion. What is $12 billion, right? But two ways to think about it are that, again, every community is a little different, but on average, you're talking about a roughly 25% reduction in property tax collections, which are the main source of general revenue for cities, counties, and towns across the state. So think of it in the context of your own budget. If you lost 25% of your revenue, what you would have to do to sort of make up for that. But second, we've actually seen an exercise like this just in the Florida legislature, where folks might remember in 2025 that the Speaker of the House proposed reducing the statewide sales tax rate by 1/4 of a point. That would have worked out to a roughly 10% general revenue cut for the Florida legislature. And the place absolutely fell apart over that, right? We had a dysfunctional legislature for the last 2 years where the House Speaker and the Senate President have essentially not been able to talk to each other all of that stemming from the bad blood, from them trying to figure out how to pass a budget that everybody could support while reducing general revenue by 10%. And they ultimately walked away from it. They did not do it, right? So, and again, that's 10% versus 25%, just to give you an idea of like sort of the vegetables that come after the dessert here.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the argument in favor here. I mean, property tax revenues have increased substantially, right, in recent years. The Census Administration has its statewide DOGE effort to expose what it sees, I guess, as excessive local government spending, and the examples of the kind of waste it thinks can be trimmed from budgets to allow property tax cuts. Does it have a point, Sadaf?
Well, I think it stems from a basic lack of understanding, really, of what our taxes fund and how we all use them. So, you know, I think, sure, you could make a theoretical argument that, like, we should be good stewards of public dollars. I mean, I don't think many people would disagree with that. However, when you look at what these property taxes are actually going toward, you know, it's things that we all rely on. It's, you know, fire and safety and mosquito control and infrastructure and so many different things. And I also point out, even though schools are carved out from this, they also will be impacted. I know there's several school board members here today, because schools don't exist in a vacuum, and so many of the services and things that schools rely on. And so nobody's going to be exempt from the impacts of this. So, yeah.
Well, what about the numbers, Amy, that we're given by the Chief Financial Officer? I mean, it seems like there's bloat that can be trimmed.
I will keep my comments to myself about the Chief Financial Officer's data, but here's what I'll say. When someone comes to any municipality, when you come here to Winter Park, and you're going to purchase a property, you're asking your realtor specific questions. Safety, location, what's the school district look like, right? That's what drives the market. The assessments that we share with you are based on that market flow. It is basic economics. The more people come, the more competitive the market. The less people come, the less competitive the market. That doesn't change. And so to have someone from Tallahassee basically try to preempt the entire state for gain really is an affront to the local folks that are in office, that are working through this process, the same property owners, the same business owners, trying to make decisions on where they want to live, how they want to live, and what quality of life they're willing to pay for. That is called local control. And so to have that level of discussion, it's an affront to your actual intelligence.
Well, I would be happy to jump in there and talk about blazing Goliath for a second too. Like, this is like, to start off, this is not a serious person, right? This is a guy who literally, his Twitter handle, it is homage to the Girls Gone Wild sex pest videos, right? This is the kind of caliber of person we're talking about.
Well, do you think his numbers are wrong though?
Yeah, first of all, yes, they are. Jim DeFede of the CBS Miami actually did a deep dive investigation pointing out the mathematical flaws in there. But separate from that is, you know, he's had a year to spend, he's been given access. The legislature gave him audit powers over local governments. He's had a year to sort of pull examples of spending. And what you have found is over and over, he is holding press conferences where he then talks about, like, the city of Orlando spending, you know, $6,000 on a poet laureate, or there might be someone's got an office of diversity, supplier diversity, that they're spending $200,000 a year. You might debate whether or not you think any of that is warranted, but none of it adds up to a 25% cut to your revenue, right? It is little pieces of objectionable spending, and objectionable only from like a philosophical perspective, right? There are plenty of people that might want to spend money on a poet laureate, for instance, but he has come nowhere close to proving the level of structural waste or fraud that would be of a corresponding magnitude of what this ballot measure would do.
Well, that is a lot of what the commentary that I see, certainly in social media posts on our content, is, well, look, you know, this municipality pays this six-figure sum to this person, this six-figure sum to that person. Do you agree with Jason Sadaf that those are relatively small numbers when it comes to the overall magnitude of what might have to be cut there?
Yeah, I think, you know, just thinking about how this even came about. So yeah, I do agree that, whatever budget tightening local governments could do is not equivalent to the huge cuts that are going to be coming down. It's not commensurate with what they're even claiming is wasteful spending. And I think that the bigger picture of taking away that local control and that local autonomy to make decisions that are, sensitive to your local community's needs is far more of a cost than trying to rein in some, wasteful spending that there might even be. But even making those budget decisions at the local level, even though he's had a year, I don't know how nuanced the analysis can be for every single local government and understanding the trade-offs that are made at the local level, where I've even heard anecdotally some example of something that was labeled as, why are they spending on this wasteful thing when that actually allowed whatever city it was to draw down additional funding in another way. So it's you don't really understand those decision-making processes, and taking away the autonomy for local governments to do that, I think, is the bigger picture risk here.
Is the DeSantis administration, though, reading the room here? It seems that a lot of voters do distrust how local governments go about spending their tax money. I think that's fair to say. I certainly hear it a lot. And I wonder how local governments answer that, what could be a public relations question. Why are they faced with so much skepticism by the public, Amy?
Well, the unknowns are always scary, right? And so I'll start with that. If you don't know the system, you don't know the process, if you're coming from multiple international spaces, in different jurisdictions, right, where you're coming from is different from where you are. And so informing yourself and being able to get that detail is very important. And I think part of this entire narrative is feeding on that fear. What they're not telling you is what's the replacement. If this happens, then what? We don't have any answers to the then what. The other component to this that is not spoken of, but is the reality is that this is actually a food fight between elected officials in Tallahassee and local officials in Miami. This is all about a Miami back and forth that will affect the state, okay? You don't have to take my word for it. I was sitting in the room on the Senate side during the committee meeting in special session, and the sponsor of the bill was asked the same exact question. He was pressed actually by Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith, asking him the question. And what came out of it was he's upset at his local county commission and how they choose to spend their money with all of their public processes, and the other members of that same committee and or legislative delegation from Miami. This is a Miami fight that we're all about to pay for. And I promise you this, anytime this legislature makes any change, there is no turning it back. Once you open that window, you're not going to be able to close it. The language is so vague that you don't know what the local components are going to be able to do. That changes everything. And if you think your pocket today is hurting, which it is, I agree. I'm a mom, I'm a grandma, I'm an elected, I have to make these same decisions with you, right? Once you open that, what other fees? You're never going to have those come back.
Jason, cost of living, that is a constant refrain, right, from, I guess, both sides of the aisle. Isn't this just an effort, really, to kind of give people tax relief at a time when they're pretty stretched? Isn't that a compelling message, especially when people don't trust how their tax dollars are being spent?
Yeah, I would agree with you that it is a compelling message, and I agree with you that it is being cast as sort of an answer to the affordability crisis. The challenge, as we've alluded to, is, you cannot cut 25% of property taxes without making that revenue up somewhere. So it becomes a tax shift on some level. But I would argue what this really is a distraction from the complete failure of Tallahassee to address property insurance costs, which are a far larger impact on most homeowners. And you know, I'm obviously not the biggest fan of the folks up there, but I will acknowledge, like, addressing property insurance is really challenging. So it's not like they have tried some things, not necessarily what I would have done, but like bringing down property insurance costs is hard to do. But because they've been unable to do it, and because they are catching so much flack from constituents for that failure, that is what's driving this. Is they're positioning this as like, this is how we are helping you. But when you realize, like, if you can bring down property insurance costs, you're affecting like the profits of insurance companies. You bring down property taxes, you're affecting services provided to the public. So it's a much more of a devil's bargain than if they had been able to figure out something to bring down property insurance costs.
Well, we could have a lively debate about property insurance. Let's not do that because we do have to finish in some semblance of good time. Amy referred to how the gaps could be made up. And one of the areas that has been talked about is that local governments might decide to levy fees. Maybe you'll get more of an itemized, a bit like cord cutting, right? You all want to cut the cord, but then eventually you end up paying more and more and more subscriptions, and we all wish we had cable back again, right? So do you think, and I put this to Amy first, do you think that we might see increased fees for things like stormwater and road maintenance and things like that?
Oh, sure, and I think you're seeing it now. You have some of the municipalities are actually increasing their current millage rate, or they're changing some of the structures today because they don't know what tomorrow brings. At the end of the day, and Jason actually said it, this is a tax shift, right? The people that pay property taxes today are property owners. The people that are going to pay for the rest of this, depending on how it plays out, is everybody. It's everybody. So here's the thing. Today, as a property owner, you pay your property taxes, in theory, if you have a mortgage, through small bites monthly, right? That goes into escrow. You get a bill at the end of the year. The mortgage company pays for it. If you are blessed by having a zero mortgage, then you pay for that at the end of the year, but you get a bill once a year. Are you okay with receiving a bill of whatever amount at the end of the year, every single person, regardless of property ownership? Because that is a possibility.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that point about this is going to be everybody. We have 3 million renter households in Florida. 40% of those are people with low income who spend more than 40% of their income on housing costs. This is going to be the people who are going to bear the burden where they're already stretched and already facing affordability problems. And yes, that is a valid argument. It really touches people personally. But then when you think about the shift, and what people really like about their communities, I mean, summer camps, we all just finished summer, that's a huge burden on parents. And if those city-run summer camps go away, what are we all going to do? What am I going to do? So yeah, I just wanted to emphasize the shift to even renters.
Well, Salif and Amy both mentioned, Jason, this cost shift. The pushback to that might be, it won't affect renters that much because there is a 5% cap, right, on non-homestead or commercial property taxes. There's not going to be a lot that has to be passed on, is there, by landlords to renters?
Yeah, I think the thing to understand about the 5% assessment cap is, first of all, it takes some time for that to really start to kick in. So there is an immediate tax shift that happens, particularly when you'll see some jurisdictions will raise their property tax rates. Because again, right, property taxes are a function of both the taxable value and your tax rate, and all of this is on the taxable value side is what this is affecting. But the assessment cap, one of the challenges with these assessment caps is affluent properties, more expensive properties appreciate faster. So what you start to see is the benefits from assessment caps overwhelmingly accrue to high-end properties, really valuable. For instance, Walt Disney World will be an enormous beneficiary of that 5% assessment cap. It already saves more than $1 million a year in property taxes just under savings it's accrued under the 10% capped now. But what you're talking about, particularly middle and lower level apartments, that 5% assessment cap might do a little shaving over time, but it is not going to suppress those taxable values in a way that it will for higher end properties. So I think particularly for lower income renters, a significant tax shift is inevitable as part of this.
Yes, Anna.
Also, if I'm not mistaken, the ballot language does not prohibit local governments from increasing millage rates for non-homestead properties, right? So that also will be a significant impact.
It doesn't come from increasing property tax rates. I don't think that you can charge a separate millage rate on class of property, but there's nothing in there that stops them from increasing it. The only cap is eventually you hit 10 mills and there's a constitutional cap there. That's one of the challenges for rural communities. We've got a lot of rural counties in the state that are already near their constitutional 10 mil cap, so they can't raise property tax rates. And those are the communities where the revenue impacts are the most devastating because they have so little money to begin with, right? But yeah, there is nothing in the amendment that will stop, the city of Orlando or the city of Miami or Hillsborough County from raising their property tax rates fairly significantly to recoup at least some of the lost revenue.
Yeah, so what does this mean then for more rural counties that don't have the same kind of tax base? We're here in Orange County, we obviously have a lot of high-value properties. Do you think that there is a different kind of effect, Amy, I'll ask you, than you might expect to experience in Orange County?
Oh, absolutely, and the bill sponsor was asked the same question, and the answer is there will be jurisdictions that will fold or close to folding. You'll see some shifts there. One here locally is the town at Eatonville. Like, this is a direct effect to our local community member, one of the oldest town. That's a real impact. They deal with real dollars on a daily basis that were going to affect them tomorrow. The state currently subsidizes, I forget how many, but significant amount of rural or small counties. So for them, that means that they're already receiving dollars from the state. They need to receive more dollars from the state moving forward.
Yeah, what do you guys think? Do you agree, Sadaf?
Yeah, and I think the point about where's that money going to come from? Because the state is already projecting deficits up to, I think, $7 billion in the next couple of years. There's tax shifts for the state coming from the One Big Beautiful Bill. So if we have to pony up $1 billion to stay in the SNAP program, if there's cuts to FEMA, then there's disaster recovery that we'll have to pick up the tab for. So, yeah, where's that money going to come from?
I did want to mention a bill that the legislature passed, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, that requires local governments to produce a theoretical 10% lower budget each year, I think from 2027. Winter Park has actually produced one this year, is my understanding, showing potential cuts to law enforcement, fire, garbage collection, canopy maintenance, arts funding, other things like that. I wonder, as we see those numbers coming out of local governments who are sort of undergoing this exercise, does that kind of give us an idea about how municipal leaders are looking at their spending and might respond should Amendment 3 pass?
Yeah, I think that's fair to look at that way. I think, again, it won't be a situation where it's just cuts, though, right? So, like, this exercise for you cuts, this is actually something the legislature does with state agencies as well. Every year they have to go through this exercise where I thought it was 5%, but maybe it's 10%. They have to produce cuts, like proposals of how they would come up with a 5% savings or a 10% savings. And what's interesting about that is those reports just sit on a desk and nobody ever pays attention to them again. It's not like the legislature is actually implementing any of these cuts, right? But yeah, I mean, that is a useful exercise in the context of if you're going to have to make up 25% of your revenue, looking at what a 10% cut looks like is probably in the ballpark of what gets cut. So yeah, those can be a very useful tool for this specific exercise.
Sanif, what do you think? Is it a good exercise for local governments to go through to try to figure out how they might live with spending less?
I mean, at this point, they should be trying to do that, to figure out what they're going to do, like if it does pass. I mean, I don't know. I think it's again, to me, it just comes back to the local autonomy to make those decisions. And sure, like, doing an exercise where you're figuring out, like, if we had to, cut here and there, or how would we balance our budget? Sure, but I do think it's kind of, really going to hamstring like the local decision making and then meeting the needs of people and communities. So
Yeah, Amy.
I'll add just a quick piece, because I think the question is valid, and I would always champion that, but it's a bit disingenuous, because it's assuming that people aren't doing that already, or that they're not taking their budget processes serious. I can only speak for myself, but I will tell you that our budget process is months. It's pages upon pages. We send a detailed packet, book, okay, to the Department of Revenue, who reviews it and asks us countless questions as to what and why, to give us our conditional approval for it to come back to the county, and then the county asks us anything they wish, and then they give us our final approval. So that process is happening, right? They're actually going through it and in trying to do the best that they can with the information they have at that moment in time to make future decisions.
And Steve, I just wanted to put a finer point on something that both Amy and Sadaf have alluded to a couple of times about this idea of what this ultimately is a shift of governing power to Tallahassee. And just so folks understand why why that is so, is the Florida Constitution reserves exactly one tax source solely to local governments, and that is property taxes. Everything else is controlled by the Florida legislature. So if you rip a giant hole in property taxes that sort of can't be overcome with just property taxes, any other revenue source that is used to make up even part of that is ultimately controlled by the Florida legislature. So you're setting up a situation where county commissions and city councils are ultimately not in control of their own revenue. You're also setting up a situation where interest groups and businesses and folks with the ability to make significant campaign contributions and wield teams of lobbyists can go to Tallahassee when they get hit with a tax or fee that they don't like. So, you know, what will happen is, like we've mentioned, you could see like utility right-of-way fees go up. But what will happen immediately is Comcast is going to go to Tallahassee and say, no, we're going to pass a law that says you can't do that kind of fee. So in addition to shifting the power of of who funds local governments and how they get funded, this also shifts the power of who ultimately pays taxes, and that is because the legislature is going after the one tax it's not allowed to touch.
Well, of course, one of the other potential sources of revenues that I've heard some elected officials talk about that could possibly ease the situation for local government should Amendment 3 or something like it passes, the tourist development tax. That would, of course, require Tallahassee to allow for diversified uses. Do you think that the Amendment 3 discussion has kind of propelled that debate about whether TDT should be allowed for uses beyond the tourism industry up the political agenda? And do you think it's something that Tallahassee could do that would maybe make property tax relief more doable for local governments? Amy?
You know, the TDT piece is the golden goose. Whoever actually put together the language for TDT, as tight as it is, that's who we need to put language for the other trust funds, because they all have been rated. Everything else has been rated because the opening was there. I have a different opinion of the TDT pieces. I think that structure was created for that purpose. Do we need it so often and so much? Potentially not, but that's the point of it. And they've held hard and fast on that thing. And so shifting this responsibility or these pieces is, in essence, another rating of the system because it's allowed.
Yes, Sadaf.
I think sometimes, I was thinking just now that if you think about the premise of these arguments, and we're often put in a place where we have to defend something against complete elimination, when in reality, if we were having a productive conversation about how to bring real tax relief, how to raise revenue equitably to fund the things we care about, we would also propose some changes to how property taxes work in Florida to make it more equitable and make it more fair. And so I think the question about whether the TDT tax could make up some of the difference if it was released kind of plays into the structural changes that would come about if we were to eliminate property taxes or reduce them in this way. Like what you said, once you open the window, you can't close it. So do we want to just throw out this one option as a structural piece of our tax code and then try to make up for it in other ways? Or do we try to preserve that as a tool in our toolbox and a way to raise revenue and find real ways to bring people relief and real ways to structure it in an equitable way.
Jason, you and I have talked about TDT plenty.
Yeah, and to be very clear, I think the laws restricting the use of TDT solely to items that further benefit and further subsidize the tourism industry are some of the worst examples of rent seeking in all of state law. That said, this will, to answer your question, yes, this would create more and more pressure on the idea to open up some of those laws, but it is not even a solution in Orlando, let alone the rest of the state that doesn't collect nearly enough TDT for that to be a meaningful sort of solution to the idea. I mean, telling Putnam County it can now spend its TDT on whatever it wants is not going to do anything, right? So, while it would be nice to have that flexibility in Orlando and Orange County, that is even here, it is not commensurate with a 25% reduction in property tax collection.
Can you see the legislature maybe giving more power to local governments over TDT, or is that a long shot, do you think?
Oh, I can absolutely see it, and the reason we can see it is they've done it over and over and over again. They've expanded the uses of TDT more than 24 times since this tax was changed. So we don't need to drop a bomb on local government finances in order to get that passed. What that requires is local communities, the elected officials in local communities coming together and pushing for it. This is why, for instance, Matt and Don Gates were able to get the ability to spend TDT on lifeguards and beach patrol because the community was unified behind that idea. It's why we've seen beach communities have been able to get the ability to use TDT on like beach renourishment and stuff. What ultimately wins those arguments is when the local community is unified, because the tourism industry's position on this is ultimately untenable. It's right. Their position is these tax dollars should only be allowed to be spent on convention centers and advertising for us, right? Our own destination marketing, and that's like philosophically a loser of an argument. But again, to overcome sort of the influence of the industry, you need local officials together, banding together and demanding that reform. But again, it's an important conversation and one I care deeply about, but it is like kind of irrelevant to the property tax discussion because property taxes, the numbers you're talking about, are just so much larger.
Well, let's talk about the politics here then, and the groups that are for and against Amendment 3. It doesn't seem to me, at least, that there is much of an organized campaign actively pushing for Amendment 3. The governor himself is not campaigning for it, and I wonder why you think that might be. Is it just that on the conservative side they think it doesn't go far enough, that maybe they thought that school taxes should have been included? Is it that there is this concern at the local level that it will result in unsustainable cuts? Why do we think there's not much of a campaign in favor of this, Amy?
It's a hot potato. It's, to me, we tried, y'all decided, if it works, we'll take the credit. If it doesn't work, it's your problem because you voted for it. That's it. That's the politics of it. So you're not getting any support from the governor, A, because it's completely different from what he actually put forth, and B, they know this is a train wreck for the local communities, and they don't want any part of saying, we have nothing to do with it. You have members of this current legislature talking in the hallway saying, we're going to leave it to the voters because they're not going to pass it, or they're going to say this, or they're going to do that, so that they're not held responsible for whatever it is that they've done. I want to give one set of numbers just for, again, awareness and bringing this back down to Orange County, if you let me. We have 493,056 total parcels in the county. That's what we assess, okay? Of that, 240,705 are homesteaded. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
The total, 493,056. So just right above. And of that, 240,705 have homestead. So almost half.
Yeah. Jason, I mean, what do you think?
240,705.
All right. Jason, what do you think? I mean, is the governor, do you think, holding out for something more like his original proposal?
Yeah, no, I think the governor's logic was, and obviously I'm not in the guy's mind. So if I was just sort of like guessing, the original proposal was essentially to eliminate all homestead property taxes, is what he kept saying he wanted. And I think he viewed that as like kind of a legacy thing he could sell in a future presidential run, right? Like that is a simple idea for people to grasp. And oh, by the way, pitching it as he's walking out the door. So he's not the guy that deals with the fallout from it, right? So he gets to campaign as the guy who eliminated property taxes without, again, he gets the dessert without the vegetables, right? But what the legislature ultimately put on the ballot, because they carved out school property taxes, and to Sadaf's very good point, that doesn't mean this won't have any impact on schools. It'll have a significant impact on schools, but it does mean that like all homeowners in Florida, no matter what, are still going to be paying property taxes. The governor loses kind of like the upside of the messaging around that, well, the potential risk of either this being such a mess that like he does catch some of that blowback, or also the fact that there's a decent chance it won't pass, that he doesn't want that to be positioned as a loss for him. So I think that is why the governor has just sort of walked away from it.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, Sadaf, do you think there's a decent chance this doesn't reach the 60% threshold that you need to pass a constitutional amendment?
Yeah, I think Kathy, what you said in your introduction about how support for this idea declines when people really understand what's at stake and what the trade-offs really are. So I think it's just a big job to try and explain what's going to happen if you don't have as much revenue to support public services and what that means at the personal level. But I do think that we just need 40% plus one person to say no, and I do think that's possible. And I do think we have encouraging news from other states. In Missouri, there was a ballot measure to eliminate their personal income tax, and that failed miserably. So, it was like 80-something% no on that. So Florida is certainly a unique beast. We'll see what happens, but I do think when people know and they know what they care about and they know what impacts their lives day to day, I think that it is true that the support does go down significantly.
Well, Florida is a unique beast, as you say, but it's also often an incubator of policy, and particularly in recent years of conservative policy. And I wonder whether this property tax effort seems to be part of a national trend. Are other states, Sadaf, I'll put that to you first, are they considering ballot questions like this?
Yes. FPI is part of a national network of fiscal policy research and advocacy organizations around the country called the State Priorities Partnership. And we know we work with partners across the country. There are 4 states with property tax ballot measures coming up in November. So Oklahoma is considering a incremental phase out entirely of homestead property taxes. North Carolina and Wyoming have limits on the ballot, and we have ours. So I think this goes back to what I said initially, that this is part of a broader narrative and a broader effort around around shifting the idea around taxes. I mean, that's already pretty ingrained in the Florida mindset, I would say, but there is a broader effort here, and property taxes are just another tactic in sort of like a long-term effort to undermine our public goods and public services and institutions.
I mean, Jason, you said actually before that part of what you think is driving this discussion in this state is a failure to adequately address the homeowners insurance issue. But some of those states that Sadaf just mentioned don't have the same homeowners issues. They're looking at this property tax issue as well, though.
Yeah, I think you talk about like there are sort of macro factors and micro factors. So there's factors that cross all states, but then there is also individual motivations and unique geographic motivations to individual states. But I think it is really important to sort of understand that this sort of property tax revolt, quote unquote, in Florida is not unique to Florida. This is, as Sadaf said, we're seeing this in a lot of states, and it is also part of the same sort of ballot measures we're seeing like in Missouri that are designed to eliminate income taxes and stuff. And basically, what this is all a part of, and this gets to the question for folks that wonder, why is this happening? What is going on here? Mm-hmm. And what it is there is a national effort. This is a big part of this is actually like Project 2025 kind of related stuff, but to shift taxation away from income and wealth and towards consumption, right? To take, property taxes are a form of, actually a form of wealth tax, right? Because it's on an asset you own. They want to shift taxes away. Folks, like, this is like conservative theorists and stuff like that I'm talking about, want to shift taxes onto consumption like sales tax and excise taxes and away from income and wealth and property. And so that is what is put sort of in the larger atmosphere that is fueling this sort of interest, and then why certain states then glom onto it. There can be, you've got a governor that wants to run for president again, you've got a state that is dying under property insurance and needs something to throw to voters. So I think all those things come together into one mix.
Do you think that's why we often hear the point that, well, I own this property outright, right? I shouldn't be paying what some people call a sales tax on my property in perpetuity. Does that sort of go to what you're talking about, in terms of, why people might push back against it?
Yeah, I think that's exactly part of the sort of, this is like if you think back to folks that remember 20 years ago when the estate tax suddenly everybody started calling it the death tax, right? Mm-hmm. And that was all like essentially a marketing campaign to try and get rid of, again, taxes on inheritance, essentially, right? This is all part of, again, this sort of macro trend to try and push taxation away from wealth and property. And so this idea that is taking root, like if your Twitter feed fills up with a bunch of people saying like, I don't own my home if I'm still paying taxes on it, right? That is coming straight out of like focus groups in DC and around the country that are part of these campaigns that, they're not like actively coordinating with each other, but they are sort of drawing from the same sort of intellectual architecture and the same sort of group of consultants and strategists.
Well, it certainly seems to be an argument that is appealing to a lot of folks. Amy, you must talk to your colleagues in other parts of the state and the other parts of the country. Do you get the feeling that this is something which is being seriously considered elsewhere?
Not in a mass scale. Okay. It is obviously in different components, but again, it's each municipality, each jurisdiction, the structure is set up for that locality, and so therefore there's so many nuances, even with Oklahoma or all the other states. It's a system set for how to handle the services, and each of them look at it different. Our office, for example, doesn't exist in different jurisdictions, and the island of Puerto Rico, which I share a lot with folks that are coming from the island, is in Puerto Rico, the property assessments are done through the central government. They have a government office, right? It hasn't been done in decades, like 4 decades. And so their assessments are completely off to what their actual is, right? So having that discussion on a daily basis is really complicated because it's so nuanced based on where you're coming from. Here, what we're talking about is here. Those of you that live here, you're here for a reason, right? It's normally your environment, your location. You've retired here, you've raised your family here, you've moved here for work. And the questions, like I said earlier, that you've asked your realtor is, what's the location look like? How is it there? I want to plug one thing for our office from a service component, because I said it when we started, and this system is set up inequitable by the state intentionally through decades. This is not a new thing. When you purchase property here, we have every property appraiser office, so all 67 counties have a tax calculator on their website. And all it is for you to be able to put in the amount of your property that you... I'd ask you a couple questions, you just answer those questions. It'll give you an estimate of what your property taxes will actually be if you are the owner, because you're the buyer. What they're seeing today is what the owner who lives in it pays for taxes. And remember when I told you your exemptions are associated to the humans that live in it? You remove that human from that property, you remove all exemptions. That then comes to market value today. That's your actual property tax bill range, not the person that owned it prior. And there is a disconnect with information where folks see that and they think, that's what I'm gonna pay. And depending on when you purchased your property, that may be so because the person has handled that tax bill for that timeline. Remember, we assess retroactively. So what I'm looking at January 1 was last year. If you sell in March, that property has already been assessed for the prior year. So that new owner won't see their bill till the following year.
Right. Right. Well, it's a fascinating discussion. We are at time, so we're going to open up the forum to league members to ask questions. Gina Hall is at the mic to my left to facilitate those questions. Please raise your hand if you need a mic brought to you, and then after the Q&A, please remain seated for important league announcements. So, as I suspected, it does look like there are a lot of questions, so let's get to those now.
Okay, before we start, where's Helen Icari? Could you raise your hand? Helen? Helen? Are you here?
Helen.
Okay. So let me ask okay, so we'll go with Susan, and remember, I play with a mic.
I know. This question is for Amy Mercado. Up until June of 2025, excuse me, my tax bill listed state school and local school. It's gone on my new bill. The bill for since June 2025 says very confusing things like capital outlay.
Wait a minute. What's your question?
What does it mean? Where is my school? Where am I paying for my schools?
We would have to look at what you're looking at, because it's probably from your trim. And again, every property is assessed on two factors: the value of the property and the humans that live in it. And your jurisdiction also affects that. So if you were within city limits versus unincorporated, there are other components that those jurisdictions can add on to your trim/tax bill. So come this way. I have team members. Mark is back there. He's the Director of Tax Roll Services. He can actually probably look at it and answer you right away. And Lurimad is back there as well. So if you have direct questions, we can look at your property.
Amy came prepared.
Thanks. Jennifer?
I just want to thank four of you. You did a terrific job, and this is just such an important topic, so thank you, all four of you. I want to tell a quick anecdote and then ask a question on what can be done.
Make it quick, because first question.
I have a friend who is just appalled at how our taxes have gone up. Looking $2,000 last year. She's a widow. Looking at it carefully, I informed her she's thinking of her property taxes. How can we communicate that? There are people who are thinking property taxes, oh, yes, I'm going to vote for this, when it's really, I said property insurance, when it's really not property taxes that have gone up that much. But is there a way in your messaging or our messaging that we can get that across?
Who wants to take that one?
What I would say is exactly what you're doing. It's one-on-one describing, it's not a property insurance. That's gone through the roof. And if you don't have proper insurance, you may not even be insured, right? So they're forcing residents to new roofs, new things to upgrade that they don't have the funding for, large ticket expenses, because it's at the state level from the property insurance. Two different components, and it's so nuanced that it really does take a one-on-one.
All right, thanks. I'm going to walk and talk. Marilyn, you had a question? Marilyn, where are you? There you are. Hey there.
Okay. I want to know, how will this property tax cut affect transit services here in Orange County, particularly transit services for folks with disabilities?
Who'd like to say that? Jason, I see you reaching for the mic.
Well, only just out of habit. I'm not. Amy might actually know if there's like a specific. I'm not aware of a specific property tax or assessment related to transit. So, I don't think there's. You can say there is a specific impact other than the funding available for all services paid for by property taxes, including whatever transit services are paid for properties, will be less, right? So. You can't, unfortunately, it's not as simple as saying this will be cut. It's more, this could be cut because something has got to be cut, and that's where the money comes from. I don't think that's a very satisfying answer, but...
and transit is one of the most expensive things that has to be paid for, correct? It's a very expensive form of infrastructure.
Okay, yes. Next question. Dave?
Yes. Are you familiar with the 1,000 Friends of Florida? They put a position out there. I did post it on the league's, Orange County's Facebook recently, and they are against Amendment 3 for about 6 major reasons. I did. The question was, are you familiar with the 1,000 Friends of Florida? Turn your hearing aid up, Gina. Come on, to change the batteries. All right, okay, fine. Remember, I'm a pain in the butt.
Yes.
Anyway. Okay, in other words, there's 6 major points that the 1,000 Friends of Florida makes. I suggest everybody read it. And when this video comes out on YouTube, look at it again and again and again and spread the word.
Yeah, one thought that sparks is, like, as folks are talking about this, you know, presuming, whatever your position is, but presuming you oppose it, just be intentional to who you're talking to and what are the things they care about. And what makes me think about that is there was some allusion to the fact that James Uthmeyer, the Attorney General, is right now, I think by tomorrow, has to come up with new language. And he was just quoted in a conservative site about how kind of uncomfortable he is with the impact to how he thinks the legislature did a bad job of involving police officers and sheriffs into this, and you can tell that some of his base is starting to revolt based on the impact to police. And so just think about, like, as you're talking to people who may be on the fence, be thinking about what they care about the most that is, you know, again, be intellectually honest about it, but that is directly impacted. That, like, for instance, for a lot of Republican voters, I think, are very concerned about public safety issues, and that is obviously, you've got the Sheriff's Association, you got the police officers and the firefighters all coming out against it. So knowing the different impacts like that, like it sounds like the 1,000 Friends of Florida, which I've also heard of, it sounds like that is important to learn.
I think Sandra wanted to mention something real quick.
Yeah, also, FPI has been putting out research and analysis on the various different impacts. So we have, you know, maps on our websites, floridapolicy.org. We have a voter guide, just like a summary of, like, what to know about it. But then we're also putting out short pieces looking at different types of impacts. So impact on hospitals, impact on children's services councils, disaster recovery, you know, we've got more down the line. So those are, you know, going to be coming out soon. And we also have been doing every other week webinars on these different topics. Anybody to join. So if you want to know more about a certain topic, feel free to join us.
Yep.
Our last question. As we know, amendments are theoretically forever, except for fair districts. And we also know that times change, economies change, whatever. And once this goes into effect and it's a constitutional amendment, theoretically, will the legislature have any ability to correct or change what has been agreed to? Does anybody know?
So I'll share that nothing has been agreed to because the language is unknown until the rewrite comes out. That's number one. And the amendment is so vague that, as I mentioned earlier, the legislature needs to come back and have implementing language for all of the questions and all of the things that are still unknown. So they have some authority. It depends on how much they're going to push that authority and under what circumstances, depending on the final outcome.
Can we fit one more in, or let's just have one more question.
You guys want the questions?
We're having so much fun here. Let's.
All right. Hi. So I'm pretty baffled by the language and a little concerned. And you brought up vagueness earlier. So the allowable expenses are A through G. And between A through F, it lists all kinds of things they can spend on. But then between F and G, it says or. That's a big or. I'm an engineer, and maybe I read the black and white different than our legislators do. And also in G, it talks about that your constitutional officers and everything, and whatever they vote on. I can't find where do I get answers for those to actually define what that means? Thank you.
So to define it it would take litigation. It's going to take a court to define it. But this was a provision that was added by the legislature in this 27-hour special session. And the question on the when this was asked on the floor of probably the Senate as well, but I was aware of it on the House. And the answer is it means anything. Anything that is in a county budget or a city budget that they vote on the budget is allowed under that. This is one of the reasons why the ballot language was struck as misleading because it says it ensures funding for core services when the actual measure itself allows them to spend money on anything. So there's no kind of straitjacket on spending as part of this. So that you're right that language is really confusing, but the way the legislature has explained it, at least in floor debate, is it means whatever a city or county wants. And that was them trying to get out front of this criticism of there's going to be all these unforeseen consequences, which ties back to the point someone else was making about there's no fixing a lot of this once it's in the Constitution, right? So they were trying to avoid a situation where if we delineate a bunch of expenses in the Constitution and then it turns out there's something we didn't think of that there's caught. So they threw this little catch-all that essentially means all of that language is meaningless.
All right.
Yes.
Last question for sure.
Last one.
Would you confirm that the legislature did pass that local leaders cannot talk about this issue as objecting, but legislators are allowed to support it? And to clarify that, this is a constitutional amendment, which is one of the reasons that the League opposes putting tax-related things in a constitution. This is not a law that we're trying to pass, and if you can clarify for the audience what it would be entailed if it ends up in the Constitution to undo it.
It would take another ballot measure to undo it, right?
Yeah, there's nothing in the ballot measure, because there's a separate piece of legislation they passed as part of this that is not going into the Constitution. I'm not aware of anything in the ballot measure that deals with what local government officials can say. So I don't think that's going to be part of the Constitution. I think maybe what you're referring to is they passed a law just a couple of years ago that prohibits local governments from spending money advocating for ballot measures of any kind. This was actually sparked in part by some charter referendum somewhere that ticked off some legislator with enough power to get a bill passed, basically. So there are restrictions on what kind of communications local governments could send this, but they can still present factual information and stuff like that. But I don't think there's any. Hopefully I'm not getting this wrong, but I'm not aware of any constitutional provision in the ballot measure dealing with that specific piece.
All right. Thank you so much for your question.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. We are at time. I just want to mention that if you want to know how those who are running for office feel about property taxes, we at the News Collaborative of Central Florida also have a voter guide. You can go to newscollabcfl.org and click on voter guide, and we ask that question of all the candidates who are running for office. But Jason Garcia, Salaf Knight, and Amy Mercado, thank you so much for asking the question. Thank you. Before we close, please stay seated for announcements from Co-President Reverend Kathy Schmitz. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you to our moderator, Steve Morton, and to our panelists. I'll invite you to return to your seats. I will just mention that if you go to vote411.org, the League's one-stop shopping for all things election-related, you can read the summaries of the pros and cons of Amendment 3 and see the list of who supports and opposes it. I will mention that the State League Board has taken a position against it. The reasoning is they don't support putting tax rules in the Constitution, and also they support home rule. So just for you to know. So speaking of vote411.org, these little magnets for your car that say vote411.org can be picked up by members at the table under the stairs around the corner. So share it broadly. We have been given a real gift of information that we can now take and share. It is up to us to get the word out about what our understanding of this and where people can get a deeper understanding. There are some calls to action. So what you can do: one, you can support investigative journalism, research, and the work of our panelists. Subscribe to Seeking Rents, get the news behind the news. Already a subscriber? Donate to help sustain it. Follow the News Collaborative of Central Florida. They are doing great work to keep local journalism alive and well, and we need that. Visit the website for the Florida Policy Institute. They have a wealth of research on topics essential to thriving communities. And please be voter ready. Do your research. The August 18th primary is open to all registered voters. Many races are nonpartisan, including Orange County Mayor, Orange County School Board Chair, Orange County Commission, as well as circuit and county judges. So many people are confused about this. Please talk to your friends and neighbors, co-workers, and family. Vote by mail ballots must be received by the SOE, Supervisor of Election, by 7 p.m. on August 18th to be counted. If you wait till the 18th, you have to take it to the office. Check your status on vote411.org. Pick up your magnet. Check out the News Collaboratives of Central Florida's Voters Guide. And early voting runs through the 16th. There's no early voting on the 17th. Those of you who have not voted yet, you can cast your ballot at the Winter Park Library as you leave. How convenient is that? And upcoming events. There's a flyer on your table for Together We Belong. This is August 30th. You have a chance to visit the Sikh temple in Oviedo, enjoy a meal, and engage in a workshop on creating a more inclusive community here in Central Florida. And today, we have Hot Topics Overtime. If you would like to know more and continue the conversation, that begins at 1:10. It's upstairs here in the event center. Go around behind this wall, you'll find stairs, but I recommend the elevator. Those stairs are surprisingly far. And you will find there Steve Mort, Jason Garcia, and Amy Mercado who have graciously agreed to go even deeper in this difficult topic. And in September, on September 9th, our Hot Topics will feature questions for the winner or winners of the August 18th Orange County Mayor's race. We value your input. Please, please, please take a few minutes to complete our event survey. We are listening. We do value your feedback, and we are adjourned. Thank you.